Schizophrenia, medicine's most feared mental illness and a secret trauma for the victims and their families. Tonight, where to find help. Coming up, Dr. Barry Jones, Director of the Service for Schizophrenia at UBC, and Linda Thibodeau, mother of twin boys, both victims of schizophrenia. But first, the political resurrection of Dave Barrett. The former premier turned radio hotliner wants another kick at the can, and it's a pretty safe bet which arena he's aiming for.
I will not be running provincially in any province of Canada, including British Columbia. I do not anticipate running municipally. So that leaves one field of speculation.
Sitting in for Jack Webster, Iona Campagnolo.
And welcome to the Webster Show once again. Is it possible to go home again? I don't know. It's very tough. I've done it once. I don't know. Why, Dave?
Well, first of all, I'm pleased to see you here, Iona. I think Iona Webster is an appropriate name.
Oh, I don't know if Jack would.
Well, you've got his name on the
my cups, yes.
Well, it was a decision that was not, a snap decision. It is something that I had been considering for some time. Ed Broadbent had talked to me about it some years ago, and there was some speculation about running in the by-election back in '83, I think it was, in the Fraser Valley, Mission Port Moody. And at that time, my answer was no, and I've given it a lot of thought, and I miss the fray for a lot of reasons.
How old are you?
After the makeup or before the makeup?
Right now.
Right now, I'm 56 years old.
We're getting old. Don't you think it's time to let the younger generation into the fray?
Well, if you look at my age compared to some of the practitioners of the art of politics, we're relatively young.
Compared to Ronald Reagan.
Well, I wasn't thinking of Ronald Reagan particularly.
I know you wouldn't.
But no, I think if I felt that my age was a barrier, I wouldn't, of course, consider it. No, I don't think so. Mid-50s for federal office is still within a reasonable amount of time of service. If, however, the voters think otherwise, well, of course, they'll have their choice. I don't even have a nomination yet at this point.
Well, they have the last word. I want to know, what did your wife Shirley say?
This is a family program, so I can't repeat the response.
But your family is grown up now.
Yes, our family has grown up. Our daughter Jane is in Australia, and she's finishing her BA there, and we have two sons, both are in Victoria.
I remember that Pierre Trudeau offered you the job of Ambassador for Disarmament, and you turned it down. Why didn't you take that route back into politics when it was offered?
Well, that was a very painful decision. It was a very gracious and very kind offer, and it is in an arena that I think everyone knows that my interests lie in. I had difficulty in dealing with the offer, which was sincerely made, around the cruise missile testing. I'll be very candid with you. I tried to reach a compromise on that my own family was not too happy with. But the negotiations broke down, and ultimately it just evaporated. It was a very kind offer, but I was unable to take it because of the cruise missile testing.
That was one of the biggest fights I ever had with Mr. Trudeau, too, in public. But
I understand the Liberal Party's changed its position. It's a little late right now.
Well, I don't think so, because it comes up for discussion again soon. But of course, compromise would have had to be what you would live with every day as Ambassador for Disarmament.
If I had had my way, I wouldn't have had to live with a compromise. I didn't have my way, there was no compromise, and I didn't take the job. And the other experience I had, well, was similar to yours in the media. And it was a fascinating experience.
What did you learn about people from the hotline that you didn't learn out of politics?
Well, I'm unhappy that you asked that question.
I'd like to know.
It's, no, I'm to be very serious. There were a number of things that I learned. One of them is that sometimes the priorities of a politician or of a party may be very correct and very valid from their perspective, the party's perspective or the politician's perspective. And sometimes the media's interests may be paramount from their perspective. But from ordinary people on a radio talk show, you certainly get a different perspective sometimes of what the issues are for them, and also from some of the people you interview. I had never realized the emotions that could be raised around single issues that groups actually focus on, such as abortion or animal rights. And that was a new experience for me to understand and appreciate how passionate people can feel about one issue and one issue alone without seeing a whole picture
And make
around
their
it.
whole political decision around it.
Everything around that whole decision.
You know, Dave, when you came in as Premier in 1972, I think that there was a wellspring of goodwill toward you. At the very least, there was a sense that justice had been done. There was another party in power. And somehow or other, it went very quickly, and you almost willfully gave it away, I think.
I think you have to put it in a historical perspective, you know. It was almost as if the Wizard of Oz was gone, and there was a relief that the W.A.C. Bennett administration was gone. No, there was an agenda of items and issues that had actually just been delayed in dealing with. In many ways, if you want to take a historical parallel, we were like the Upton Sinclair in California, only 40 years delayed. We brought in the land bill right away.
And 367 bills in 3 years.
367 bills in 3 years. Almost 300 of them are still there, still operative. They changed the face of British Columbia. Many of the things that were gone or eliminated, tragically, had they been kept today, particularly in the economic area, we would not be in the same mess we are in British Columbia.
Well,
There was a revival, too, of the old sense of coalition, the bugaboo of socialism. The Liberal Party collapsed. Pat McGeer and Gardy Gardam and Alan Williams jumped ship and left David Anderson and left Gordon Gibson all alone. And of course, the Tories, they jumped. Hugh Curtis was a Tory. They made a coalition. And although our vote went up substantially, we lost.
But Dave, what would you do differently now if you were in that position than you did then? Would you let all your old guard come into your cabinet as you did? Would you let someone like...
Yeah, I think there's too much substantially I would have done different. Everybody benefits from 20/20 hindsight. I don't think there's anything... One thing I think I would have done was certainly a bit slower, 300 and some odd bits of legislation. But we were propelled by events. People were expecting change. They got dramatic change. Many of the programs, Mincome, Pharmacare, Ambulance Care Service, some of those cabinet ministers, Bill King, Dennis Koch, some of them did, incredible jobs.
It's very interesting. When I think of the premiers who have been New Democratic premiers, Ed Schreier, Howard Pauley, Alan Blakeney, none of them have the reputation of the big red scare bugbear that Dave Barrett has. In the rest of Canada, you're looked upon as the most socialist ideologue. Are you prepared to go to Ottawa and have that kind of view of you?
Well, that's kind of interesting. My good Jesuit teachers would kind of smile at that.
Well,
I don't think, I think there are images. There are certain people who wanted to see the color of my underwear before they made a decision to vote for me.
We tried to find that commercial today.
Oh, well, anyway, but in any event, no, I think it was a matter of the image and perception here in British Columbia. There are people who are very powerful in this province, liberals, conservatives, who jump to social credit. You've fought them in your own party. They've double-crossed their own party federally for provincial purposes, and that's the focus in British Columbia. It's a coalition against the CCF-NDP.
But if you, Dave Barrett, become a federal MP and all goes well, don't you think that the same kind of position will come forward if the polls hold as well as they have this last year for Broadbent and Company? Don't you think you're going to have the same kind of hysteria surrounding the possible election of a new Democratic Party?
We're talking about a generation ago. I think the world has changed dramatically since that time. I think that at that particular time there was also an international atmosphere that was building up. There was the whole range of propaganda about Allende in Chile, about Gough Whitlam in Australia, about the Labour left emerging in Britain as being radical.
Dave Barrett, the Allende of the North?
Oh, well, yeah, hardly. It was a compliment, but hardly. There was a democratic election by Allende. He was murdered. There was no doubt there was international interference, and that was a shameful act. Gough Whitlam was taken out of power by an act of their own Governor General. In British Columbia, we lost to a coalition. Times have changed since then. Issues have changed. Perceptions have changed. And I think social democrats in Canada are viewed entirely differently than they were 15 years ago.
Do you think the fundamentalist right has just about run its course?
Yes, I do.
Do you think that it's time for a change?
I think the fundamentalist right has run its course. I think there is, in a broad sense, a liberalization of attitudes and approaches in North America. I think there's an emergence of new generation in politics of North America, Vietnam veterans in the United States who are now emerging into elected positions. I think there's I hate the word yuppie, but there is a younger generation that is highly skilled and highly educated in Canada, that has a social conscience, that is looking at political options. They're appearing in the Liberal Party. They're appearing in the NDP. They did appear in the Conservative Party. They had hoped and anticipated that Mr.
yes.
Mulroney was going to be a progressive Conservative. So they were frustrated in that
The
regard.
people want honest politicians, and they're going to search for them till they find them. More calls to Dave Barrett and your calls after the break. Back again, and with your calls to Dave Barrett. Here we go. You're on the air.
Hi, Dave.
Hello.
I just want you to know that I'm delighted to know you're back in politics, whether it's federal, provincial, or anything else.
There's someone who loves you.
Well, that's very kind. Are you in your 50s too?
No, I'm 39 and holding.
I am 39 and holding. That's
But
good.
I know you'll do well at whatever you do, whatever you try.
Thank you
Thanks
very,
very much.
Okay.
Here's another one. Go ahead.
Yes, David.
Yes.
David?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, they say to be a politician, you have to be very thick-skinned. I'd like to know how you have the gall to present yourself as a federal representative of the people of British Columbia when you almost broke this province in 30 months.
Is that right?
As the premier of our province.
And how much debt did we leave when we left office? How much was British Columbia in debt when we left office? Could you tell me that?
It wasn't the case of being in debt. It was the money you handed out hither and yon to
Oh,
all your people.
How
You were
much money?
discussing,
You know,
nepotism and the likes of
The
the
nep-
parties
this
previous
is-
to you with WAC Bennett and the like.
this is the kind of call that doesn't like to
I
deal
think
with
we've
you.
got your drift, sir.
When
Thank
we
you.
left office, the debt
I don't wish you any luck at all.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
$2 billion in debt when we left, $17 billion today.
You're on the air.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Dave,
Yes.
I'd like to wish you best of luck in 87 and Iona. I'm a big Dave Barrett supporter from a long time ago.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to say good job in the future.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye. And you know, Dave, the Senate is full of people who were once upon a time premiers. They're very unhappy by my experience. Also, I've noticed that those who have run into the House of Commons are never that fulfilled. I remember Jerry Regan, you know, after being premier, it's a real come down to be an MP. You think you're going to be able to stand it?
Well, that's a very good question, Iona, and I don't know the answer to that. A lot of people have posed that to me and say, you know, what are you going to do in Ottawa? Be another backbencher? Well, I don't think I'd just be another backbencher. But you raise the issue of the Senate. I've been puzzled. I'm opposed to an appointed Senate. I've been puzzled, though, while the system is there, that people who have been premiers were not automatically put in. W.A.C. Bennett should have been made a senator.
Yes.
Lougheed should be a senator. Blakeney
They
should be
were
a senator.
all offered it, as far as I know.
I'm not so sure if that's the case, but now, however, if I was offered it, I would refuse it because
Naturally.
I believe in an elected Senate. But I think there's a lot of wasted ex-politicians out there.
Well, it's
a lot
another
of them.
resolution recently passed. You're on the air.
Well, talking about wasted politicians, I'd like to have a question for both of you. I'd like to know, Iona, if you had plans to run for the Liberal Party out here in BC and with Mr. Barrett and you representing us down there, that would be great.
All right, Iona Campagnolo, I want to ask
No,
you.
no. I'm the host this time. Thanks
I
very
really
much.
have another question, too.
Yes?
That's about this expiring of the uranium moratorium. And Mr. Barrett, if you were Premier of the province at this point, how would you react to this uranium moratorium that's due to expire at the end of February, and why would you do it?
Well, the uranium moratorium should be kept on indefinitely. We have very serious international problem with the disposal of wastes from nuclear plants, let alone the question of nuclear weapons. And that, of course, refers to the very kind offer that Iona reminded me of by the former Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, the ambassador. He offered me the ambassador for disarmament. The issue was around uranium mining, the testing of cruise missiles. I think it's a serious mistake. My position is an absolute end to uranium mining, an absolute end to testing weapons. I think it's a serious mistake for all humankind.
Thank
Would you
you.
support a referendum, a public referendum on this question in BC?
You'll never see that kind of referendum on uranium mining. I don't think Mr. Van der Zam would bring it in.
Thanks very much for your call. How do you think Mr. Van der Zam's doing?
Well, he's in a very extended honeymoon period. You must remember that he still represents the Social Credit Party, per se. Now, whether or not there'll be any deviation from that party's method of operating, that the kind of decisions that have been made in the past, it's hard to say. It's too early to say at this point.
Back to the phones. You're on the air.
Yes, hello, David.
Hello.
An old friend just got back from Ontario. I'd like to say hello to you.
That's very kind.
And Joe and the rest of the kids.
Well, that's very kind.
Right. Now, there's a thing that puzzles me, Dave, and I wonder if you can give me a little enlightenment on it. It seems to me that there's a gap between the federal politicians and the provincial politicians and the positions of the provinces. And do you think that with your experience as a provincial politician that you can help straighten out this misunderstanding and gap that exists between the two governments? I'll hang up and wait for your answer.
I think there are occasions when both federal politicians and provincial politicians use differences for their own political purposes, hopefully not on major issues. I felt that a major issue was the constitutional debate, and I felt that was very debilitating by some provincial premiers to fight Ottawa so hard on that issue. Now, in the past, what has been attempted to be established is a relationship between provincial governments and backbench MPs. I tried that, and I got bruised by an unnamed MP. Iona was not the person.
Well, I bruised you once on Indian land claims.
But that was not in the meeting that we had with the MPs.
No.
I tried a pioneer meeting of the MPs. It didn't work. I'd like to see that kind of thing go on.
Yeah.
I really would.
Thanks for your call, sir. We're moving on long distance now. Boston Bar, you're on the air.
Boston Bar.
Hi, Dave.
How are you?
Not bad. It's good to see you back and getting into federal politics.
Well, it'll be a while yet. I don't anticipate anything for the next 6 or 8 months.
We haven't even found out which riding he's going to run in yet.
Well, he's going to win whatever riding.
Well, that's very kind.
Say, I'd like to know what you're going to do about all these high-cost pensions, like in Crown corporations, where they only come in for 2 or 3 years and then they get an index pension, and then.
Well, I would think that for the most part, there's a minimum of 10 years before people are qualified for pensions, unless there's exceptions made. Those exceptions do take place because of political decisions, but I think that there needs to be a whole review of the whole structure of pensions. You know, the Macdonald Royal Commission made a lot of recommendations, a number of which I disagree with. One that I feel is important is a guaranteed minimum income. With that debate, we could look at the whole pension scheme, both private and public, in Canada. I would like to see that done so those anomalies you described could be there'd be a focus on them and perhaps some reform in that regard.
Yeah, well, when you get doctors in a railway situation, for instance, that are chairman of the board, I don't see how they make these decisions.
You figure it out.
Thanks for your call. We're going to take a quick trip over now to Victoria. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Hello, Victoria. Did you give up on us? I guess they did. We'll have to move along, and here you are. You're on the air.
Yes, hi, Dave.
Hello.
I just heard the other day you were talking about your pension.
That's right.
And I thought you were kind of light, making a rather light of it in the fact that Bill Bennett granted it to you.
Yeah.
And
I was being ironic, which is very, very difficult to do through the media, but let me explain the point that I was trying to make.
Yes.
When we were elected in 1972, the MLAs only worked 3 months of the year. I insisted that they become full-time, and we increased the salary. We doubled the salary from $12,500 to $25,000 so that people would work full-time. That was the idea. We were attacked by the Socreds, Bill Bennett, and the rest of them, saying how terrible, how rotten, look what they've done to the salaries. Well, the ironic point that I was making with some sarcasm was that as soon as the Socreds got elected, they goosed the salaries way up, and they took care of the pensions. My pension under the NDP scheme would have been around $900 a month. My pension under Social Credit as a politician while they were in government was jumped to $3,100. If I had stayed another 8 months under Social Credit, they changed the pension scheme again, and I would have been up over $4,000. Some of those Social Credit cabinet ministers have retired with pensions of $40,000 and $45,000 a year. They were the same guys who ran around this province and screamed and hollered saying, oh, the NDP is wasting money. well, they sure pocketed their fair share. That's the story, and that's what I meant when I made that comment.
Oh, okay.
Thanks for your call. Well, it looks to me as if you're in full form, almost ready to fly right back into an election. I'd like to thank you for coming on the show and wish you luck, but not too much.
Thank you, Iona. And where are you going to run?
And I'll be back after the break to talk about schizophrenia. What is schizophrenia? Last October, I was doing my political rounds and went to a meeting of the Friends of Schizophrenia Society in Surrey. And while I was there, I heard the story of Linda Thibodeau and was so deeply touched by it, I haven't forgotten it. So I've invited Linda and Dr. Barry Jones to come on the show today to tell you this story. Linda, would you tell British Columbians what happened to you and your family?
To shorten it a little, Iona, as you heard, it is a fairly lengthy story and covers quite a long period of time. But briefly, over the course of 1 year, both of our sons became ill with schizophrenia.
And where did you get help? Where could you go for help? Did you find Dr. Barry Jones quickly, or did you find someone to help you, or was it just a very difficult time for you?
I wish we had found Dr. Jones quickly. Unfortunately, and not uncommon, it took months almost for us to get appropriate help. Our one son searched out a psychiatrist who treated him without medication, not very appropriate and certainly not very helpful for him. The illness progressed, and it was only after many months that we finally got him into hospital and drug treatment was finally started. And finally, at that point, that was the beginning of some very real help for us.
So you had two perfectly normal, beautiful sons doing well in school, and all of a sudden, in their 17th year, this began.
Absolutely.
Doctor, does this really take young people always? Is it always in young people that it begins?
It's a disease of teens and 20s. That's when it starts. So it starts in the prime of people's lives. And as a result, it's a devastating disease because it's a chronic illness. For most people, it goes on throughout their life.
I was reading that approximately 50% of all mental illness beds go to schizophrenia.
That's right. It's the most severe illness of the mental illnesses that we know, and it's probably one of the most severe medical illnesses.
So what do we know about this disease? You must have learned a great deal about it, Linda, in your time. What do we know? Is it genetically inherited?
There certainly is, at least in my mind, a genetic component. I have a first cousin who is also diagnosed schizophrenic. In my husband's side of the family, there is some history of depression. Certainly when you have identical twins that are both hit, and the statistics are very high, I think Dr. Jones will back me up. When you have one identical twin who is ill, the chances of the other becoming ill are quite high, in fact. So there is
such devastation in the family. You and your husband, how has it affected you?
It is very devastating. The first thing that happens to most families, and certainly not based only on my own experience, but in talking with other families, is that they go into total shock. They can't, first of all, they don't understand what's happening. Second of all, you don't get a diagnosis, as with a broken leg, you know, as soon as you visit the doctor. So it takes many, many months. So you go into total shock. You can't believe what's happening yourself. You go through some very helpless, hopeless feelings. You aren't able as a parent to fix this up as you are with most other things. Just getting appropriate help can be a vicious, vicious round of attempts. And I think it's only after a great deal of time, months, often years, before parents really come to terms with the fact that this is an illness that is going to possibly affect the rest of their lives. And in some ways, they're able to cope a little better with it.
Is there any hope, Doctor, because you started your clinic in UBC just recently in the last year. Is there a lot of research going on, a lot of money being spent in this disease, or is it still sort of in the closet?
It's in the closet. It's starting to come out. The foot is coming out of the door, but very, very slowly. This is a disease that affects 1 in 100 people. So that's 20 million people, 40 million people worldwide that are affected by schizophrenia. There should be a lot of money being spent on this illness. The amount of money, in fact, is much less, decidedly less than is spent for many other diseases, certainly needing research funds. But I think that schizophrenia falls far behind.
It's very big business. I was reading statistics in the United States in 1983. $48 billion was spent in various ways in lost jobs and in bed needs and pharmaceutical needs for this disease. You would think that that would be cause alone to spend a vast amount of money in research.
You would think it would be cause alone, but it isn't. And I think the reasons are, well, there are a few main ones. One is that this is an illness which frightens people. Losing one's sanity is a very frightening experience, and people don't want to know about it, don't want to talk about it, don't want to deal with it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just the stigma that is attached to the disease. Schizophrenia is a disease that is not an attractive disease in its worst form, and people shy away from it.
Is it the most frightening of the mental illnesses, schizophrenia?
Well, it's frightening in the sense that it is an unpredictable illness when the person is in the midst of what we call a psychotic episode, when they are suffering from the symptoms of delusions or hallucinations.
It used to be said that schizophrenics were people with split personalities, and that's not true, is it?
No, that's not true. The split is from reality, not from multiple personalities, as has been described in movies and media.
Is there hope? What's the prognosis for Linda's sons?
Well, the prognosis for any individual with this disease is very varied. Some people will, and this is about 1/3 of the people suffering from this disease, will do very well, may have another episode, but will essentially be in remission on treatment usually. Another third will do fairly well, but will have symptoms constantly, mild, because the medications that they may be taking are controlling those symptoms. And then another third are chronically ill, in hospital, often in chronic provincial hospitals, and unable to leave because they are too severely ill to be out in the community.
So people can actually get well from this on their own without treatment? You think it'll just go into remission? Is that true?
Only in very, very unusual cases. I think this is generally a chronic illness, and you don't work your way out of it, you don't talk your way out of it. You hopefully get better with medication, but even then you're left with a lot of side effects. The medications that are used are quite toxic, and it's a difficult treatment program to follow.
What kind of advice did you get in the early days, Linda, when you were fighting to find out what was wrong with your sons? What did they say to you?
Well, the first advice we got was from our family doctor, a very caring and competent family physician who told us to go home and wait for something drastic to happen. And in fact, that's what we did.
Knew.
He knew our son was becoming more and more psychotic, yes.
What were the first symptoms you saw in your son?
The first symptoms that were obvious to us were some occasional paranoid statements, very uncommon, or very certainly not typical of his nature. For example, are you spying on us? We'd be on the telephone, are you talking about us? We'd receive a letter, is that about me? And those sorts of paranoid statements, suspiciousness, that sort of thing. And
there's some similarity between those symptoms and the symptoms of a child going into drug use, isn't there?
There are, and oftentimes parents are very confused by that. They're not sure what's happening.
Is there a similarity in the symptoms?
There is a similarity. What can happen also is that a person who's starting into the illness may start to take drugs of abuse or have been taking them, and then it's very confusing not only for the families, the patient, but also for the caregivers as to what they are in fact dealing with. But unlike drugs, the symptoms of the illness, the psychotic symptoms, persist way beyond the point of the intake of any drugs.
As I understand it, they go from a vast display of emotion to no emotion at all, is that right?
Exactly.
It must be terribly confusing for the family as well as the doctor in every way.
I think for the families, this is the group that are hit the most. The individual who has this illness at times may not truly understand that they have a disease, that they have a disorder, may not truly understand the detriment that is produced in their life. But for the families, they can see it. They have full insight into what it has done to their affected relatives. And I think the strength that they show in dealing with this is at times amazing.
Well, your calls to Linda Thibodeau and Dr. Barry Jones after the break. We're back again. Linda, you were telling me that one of the doctors said that the boys can just go out in the street. Is that possible?
It's quite possible. I don't know how possible for our sons, but certainly one of the things that concerns me most as a parent is that, for example, Alzheimer's victims, we wouldn't put up with as a society seeing them on the street. We make sure they get treatment. Unfortunately, many of our young schizophrenics are on the street.
In the Society of Friends of Schizophrenia, they know who these young people are. They're sometimes living on welfare because they can't work. Their whole life is really in turmoil, isn't it?
Very much so. And the problem is that, again, not unlike Alzheimer's, the very organ that they're expected to reason with is the one that's been affected.
Exactly. Well, we're going to go to the phones. You're on the air.
Yes, I address this to the doctor. First of all, what are the symptoms that you can look for? And the next question, and I'll hang up to the answer, is does this in any way run parallel with a manic depressive? Thank you.
Well, the symptoms that you see in schizophrenia are really of two types, what we call the positive symptoms, or the delusions or hallucinations. A delusion is often a paranoid delusion, feeling that there's a group of people out to get the affected person. Hallucination is a false perception, often hearing a voice or voices talking to the person, telling them to do things, commenting on their actions. And then the negative symptoms, social withdrawal, emotional blunting of their emotional responses to things in their life. These are the more devastating symptoms because they do not respond to the medications that we currently have available. In terms of your reference to manic depressive illness refers to swings of mood to extremes. People with schizophrenia usually do not have that. They will instead have a lack of mood, a blunting of their mood. But there can be a mix, and there are many people who fall right in the middle between those two disorders.
You're on the air.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I have a question for the doctor, and that is, then I have a statement. Do you let people know what their diagnosis is? In 1974, I was having a lot of difficulty, and a very compassionate doctor allowed me to read my files. And the diagnosis was chronic schizophrenic, prognosis poor. I was horrified, and it changed my life. I was non-compliant to drug treatment, and I read Reality Therapy by William Glasser, and I'm now working full-time in my profession, and I no longer have any symptoms. But nobody told me for years what they thought was wrong with me, and I'm wondering how you feel about that. I'll hang up and listen to your answer.
Thank you.
Well, we now tell people if they have a diagnosis, we tell them. I think it only makes sense. If somebody has diabetes, you don't keep it a secret. The same thing is true of schizophrenia. We don't tell them a diagnosis if we're unsure, because that's giving somebody a diagnosis and a prognosis that may ultimately be wrong. Maybe that happened in your particular case, because it is unusual to be off medication and to be doing as well as you're obviously doing with this illness. I should say that the diagnosis of schizophrenia was used very loosely 10, 20, 30 years ago, and many people were called this, and they did not really have this disease. So we're tightening up our own diagnostic.
The old style of psychotherapy,
right.
All the old shibboleths. Well, I'm glad to hear you're making some progress, because obviously, Linda, if the boys know what's wrong, they can help themselves more, don't you think?
Definitely.
And keeping them in the dark seems very hopeless to me. Well, we'll go to the phones. You're on the air.
Yes, I have a twin sister who has schizophrenia. We're fraternal twins. And she'll go for a long period of time and not speak at all, like very, very quiet. And then she'll tell my other sister and I that she feels that she's the devil reincarnated, and etc. And we both find it's a very, very frustrating thing to deal with. And I wondered if the doctor had any suggestions that for families that have a member of the family who has this illness, how to handle it.
Well, if I had easy answers to that, I'd be working on a much quieter ward and we'd be working with a much easier illness. There are no real easy answers. When somebody presents what you just described, a delusion, I think the best way to handle it is not to agree with the delusion, but at the same time not to confront the person. It's a symptom, and to deal with it in a sense like a symptom. To accept it as being the way the person believes, but at the same time to draw your own conclusions and to tell them what your reality is. So not confrontational, but to at least to show them that you're not in agreement with what they're saying.
Yes, thank you. I wondered also about the genetic aspect of this. We have a first cousin that lives in Seattle that also has schizophrenia.
Well, the genetic aspects of schizophrenia are clearly shown, and that's why we know that this is a disease and not something that is learned. The way we know that is that there are studies that are done where affected individuals who have been adopted out of a family with schizophrenia go on to show the same incidence or prevalence of schizophrenia.
Is there any testing for, say, if I was to have a child and schizophrenia runs through my family, if I was to have a child, is there any testing to find out if my fetus would have schizophrenia at all? Or?
There is no testing at the present time, but I think we're coming closer and closer to that with increased research findings. I would imagine that there will be a time, as with some other brain diseases like Huntington's chorea, where there is a test. You know or you don't know. You know as to whether you have the disease. You know possibly as to whether a young individual will have the disease.
But there's another thing that this lady could do, and that is join Friends of Schizophrenia, don't you think, Linda? That's a support group. Have you joined any of the support groups?
I wrote to the Friends of Schizophrenics, and I had some literature sent to me, and I thought that would be a help, you know, to understand how to deal with this better.
The number is 734-3613, and I, as I said, saw this meeting, and I would think if you had someone in the family in need, it would be very supportive. They've helped you, haven't they?
They helped me a great deal. As a matter of fact, they were the first real help that we had as a family.
It might be something to try.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. You're on the air. Whoops. That one's gone. We're going to find somebody gave up on us. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a son. He's about 7 years old, and I don't know if this really has anything to do with schizophrenia, but he seems to have an imaginary friend. But he'll be sitting there looking at me, and he'll just be talking to someone that's not there, and he's like looking straight at me, pretending that there's someone there. It doesn't really make any sense.
I think that happens quite a lot. Doctor?
Well, I have imaginary friends too, so I don't think I would worry about that. That's a common thing in children, and there's nothing to worry about. If a 20-year-old were to persist with that kind of behavior, talking to themselves, talking to something that isn't there, that might be a symptom of schizophrenia. But in a 7-year-old with the concept of an imaginary friend, that's quite normal.
Oh, really?
Don't worry.
Well, I'm just kind of scared because he seems to make love with his little friend all the time, too.
I know a very clever man who used to have an imaginary friend, and his grandfather always used to say, "Are you talking to a wise man?" And he always said, "Yes." Well, we're going to go to this phone and see what you have to say. Go ahead.
Hello, I have a question for the doctor, and it's concerning megavitamin treatment for schizophrenia. What does he know about that, and how does he feel about it?
There's a doctor in Saskatchewan, isn't there?
Actually, Dr. Hoffer.
Dr. Hoffer in Victoria.
Right, he's now in Victoria.
Right.
The megavitamin theory is an interesting theory because we're always looking for any theory that's going to give us an understanding of this disease. The treatment is essentially non-toxic, although one has to be careful with megavitamins. They can produce side effects, they can produce problems. There was one large study that was done in Canada looking at this in a controlled double-blind fashion. It didn't find the megavitamin therapy to be any more effective than placebo treatment. However, any study is only worth what that one study can say. It doesn't close the door on that as a potential treatment. I, though, would caution anyone to go to that as a first-line treatment. I think we do know drugs that are effective, and when we get to treatments such as that, we're looking for things that might be unusual treatments in rarer cases.
I would like to relate an experience that we've had personally. Our daughter, we dealt with doctors who, like yourself, who were trying drugs, and it didn't work for our daughter.
But the vitamins
when we contacted Dr. Hoffer, we live in Victoria. I'm over here at this time. And she came under Dr. Hoffer's care and began the megavitamin treatment. That was 10 years ago. And our daughter now is coping. She's on her own and coping very well. It's proven our answer.
That's very good news. Thank you very much. We'll be back to more calls after the break. Well, we're back again with calls to Linda Thibodeau and to Dr. Barry Jones. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hello, Inola.
Yes.
Yes, I'd like to talk to Linda.
Okay.
Hello, Linda.
Hello.
This is Kelly. I don't know if you remember me, but I'm a schizophrenic as well, and I was also a girlfriend of one of your boys.
I sure do.
Do you remember me?
I sure do.
How are you?
I'm just fine. How are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm working. I work 4 days a week now. I have a baby, and I'm married, and I'm doing really, really well. And I just hope your son's doing just as well, too.
Thank you, Kelly. Very nice to hear from you.
Okay, you too.
Thanks for calling.
Bye.
She sounds so happy and well-adjusted. Does that happen very often?
Well, if she has that particular illness, I don't know, then that's a rare case. I think one wants to hold out hope for people with this illness, and certainly research and new treatments are coming.
I think the deep, dark question is, are people with schizophrenia dangerous to themselves or to others?
The figures would say that there is no greater incidence of violence or aggressiveness with schizophrenic patients as compared to the normal population. I think what happens is that when a schizophrenic patient becomes violent, it's in a more dramatic, unpredictable way. And that is picked up on by the media because these are interesting events, assassination attempts, multiple murders. This does happen.
So lots of what we read in the newspaper is the result of some of this illness.
Is a result of some of this illness, which means that we do need to know more about this illness, and it's an illness that has to have research. On the other hand, though, you can't, with a patient who has this illness, assume that they're going to hit you over the head because they have no greater prevalence of showing that kind of behavior.
Just before we went to the break, there was a woman calling about megavitamin theory, and so little is known about this disease that you really can't afford not to examine every possibility. What about metabolic disorders? Is there any possibility of a line there of investigation?
Well, the most evidence that we have at the present time works backwards from the way the drugs that work on this illness work in the brain, and that is that this is a disease of a particular neurochemical called dopamine.
Same as Alzheimer's?
Not so much with Alzheimer's, but the same as Parkinson's disease, but affecting people at a younger age and probably a different region of the brain.
To the calls. You're on the air.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, I'd like to know what can be done about a person who has been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia if there are no family members or doctors apparently taking care of him. This person I'm concerned about is on his own. Apparently doesn't take any medication, and he lives on a diet of chocolate bars and things like this, and he's quite a concern to quite a few people, and I think I'll hang up and listen to your answer. I'm concerned as to what can be done for him. Thank you.
Linda, this is one of the people you said is out on the street. What's to be done?
It becomes very, very difficult when the person who is ill won't seek treatment or accept the treatment offered. As parents, I think, or families, all we can do is be very supportive.
But they have no parents or family, this person. Where can he go?
Friends, whomever.
The man who called?
Closest. Oh, he's on the street?
No, the man that he called was concerned about him. Maybe he could help him in some way.
Yes. Again, only as far as helping to lead him to appropriate treatment.
And where can the treatment be found?
Well, the treatment can be found in our service. The treatment can be found in many different psychiatric services in Vancouver, across British Columbia. There is treatment there. It's often hard, though, to get the affected individual to the treatment and to convince them that this is treatment that is useful.
Apparently Vancouver has one of the best treatment centres anywhere, but then of course it's only Vancouver and Lower Mainland. What about the rest of British Columbia? Do they have access?
Well, the rest of British Columbia does not have direct access in some centres to psychiatric care. Many general practitioners do a very good job taking care of these patients. The rest of British Columbia does have access to our service. They do have access to the services available in Vancouver and at the hospital that we're working at.
So people looking in tonight could contact you. We'll get that telephone number back up again for you so that you can see it. And there it is again, Friends of Schizophrenia, 734-3613, and they will direct you. We're going back to another call. You're on the air.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Question for Dr. Jones, please.
Go ahead.
I have a 40-year-old schizophrenic daughter. She later married another schizophrenic she met at Riverview, and they had a daughter who's now 18, and we have raised her, and she was diagnosed at age 3 as being autistic, and it's been suggested that maybe the basic cause of her brain damage was the psychotropic drugs her parents were on, and I wondered if Dr. Jones thought that was likely.
I think that's a question I can't answer because I don't really know that we have information about that. There is no evidence that the drugs that she was most likely on would cause childhood autism, but there is always that possibility. We don't have enough people who have been in that situation to be able to say for sure what these drugs are capable of doing to a fetus. There is also the possibility that the genetic component of two individuals marrying with this illness produced a more severe form of the illness that affected an individual at a very young, early age. That's a possibility that I throw out, but no evidence, no hard evidence for that.
The problem is not enough research, not enough information, not enough public education, isn't it? That kind of information you can probably use in research someday.
That's the kind of thing that we are striving for and the types of research that would be ongoing in schizophrenia, but we need more money.
Thank you for your call. We're going to go up to Chetwynd now. You're on the air, Chetwynd.
Yes, hello, Dr. Jones.
Yes.
I'd like to ask about the use of the precursor-style drugs in the treatment of schizophrenia, and I'll hang up for your answer.
Thank you.
Okay, if I caught that,
Precursor?
It was precursor-type drugs. Precursor drugs is not the usual term that we use, but one of the types of medications that are used in psychiatric illness is a natural dietary substance that is turned into a neurotransmitter in the brain. And there are various precursors of dopamine that I mentioned that could be theoretically used as treatments in schizophrenia. They have been attempted to be used. They haven't met with much success. Maybe in the future we'll have a better understanding of how to administer them. We'll have a better understanding of how to evaluate them.
Thank you very much. We've got one more call, and this will have to be a quick one. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I wanted to ask the doctor if he was familiar with the book called The Schizophrenic Child, written by Dr. Sheila Cantor, who works out of a treatment foundation in Manitoba.
I'm familiar with it.
Yes, do you have a question on it?
Yes, I was wondering what his feelings were about the book, whether he feels that there's some validity to her premise that schizophrenia exists very early on in children and that symptoms can be found even as early as infancy.
It's another area of active research. One is looking at children at high risk for the development of schizophrenia. These are individuals who, just like one other caller mentioned, two individuals with schizophrenia give birth to a child. This is a child that is presumably at high risk. One can study this child from an early age and look for signs and symptoms.
Well, thank you very much for that call, and thank you both for appearing on the show today. I'd like to especially thank you, Linda, because by telling your story and being so upfront with it, I think you're helping many other people to bring this out of the closet where you, doctor, can get a good look at it and maybe help improve it. I'll be back to say goodbye after the break. Tomorrow on Webster, Dr. Tomorrow is going to write us a recipe for the next century. That will be at 5 p.m. precisely.